Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you so much for joining us out here. Before I start, at the outset, very warm welcome to my eminence co-panelist. I'm, along with the audience, looking forward to some very interesting discussions. I'm sure we'll stand to gain a lot from your views and your experiences. And talking about the topic for the day, taking it to the last mile, making education equitable, accessible, and experiential. I noticed one new word out here, experiential. Otherwise, the way I recall, ever since I've understood the domain of education, ever since I've been working in that, I think that's one target we have been chasing as a country at every level, at central level, at state level. How do we make education equitable and accessible? Over the years, especially over the last 5 to 12 years, I think we have made wonderful strides in that, but we still got some distance to cover. But it's very good to see another word over there, experiential, because I think experiential is a word which will be going to make a difference. Experiential is a word which will make our education much more meaningful. Experiential is a word which shall make our educated people more employable. Ultimately, moving towards a sustainability, moving towards generating meaningful employment for everyone. Equitable, accessible, experiential, the first thing that comes to mind is technology. But I think it's not only about technology, it's also about the systems, it's also about the policy, it's also about the perspectives that each of us carry. If I talk in terms of technology, again, as a country, we have made very good strides. If you look at teledensity today, I think 90% people have almost coverage through wireless, out of which 75% have a smartphone in hand. Quite some strides being made, even in rural areas. I think coverage is almost 58%. But if you contrast that with what's happening in educational institutions, I think picture is not that rosy. So teledensity apart, a lot of schools today still are not connected either to each other or to the internet. I think connectivity level across schools is ranging from 30 to 35% across the country, which is abysmally low. You would agree on that. Also, connectivity level is 13%, not 32%. 32% schools have access to IT equipment of any kind, IT devices. So pretty different scenario than what we talk about teledensity or what we talk about connectivity. That's one. Second, even where connectivity is there, what is it that we have done as a country? What is it that we have done as government? What is it that we are doing as industry to ensure the connectivity is leveraged? I'll give you an example. During pandemic, I was associated with a school called Him Jyoti Foundation. I won't call it a charitable school, it's an NPO school. It takes pride in comparing itself to Welham in Dehradun. They say we are NPO, but comparable to that. There were two sets of children over there. One set of children who had access to smartphones from their parents, and the children in these schools come from low income groups, all from either various unstructured, structured vocation. So some had access to smartphones, and they were utilizing that, but a large majority, despite having access to smartphones, despite having access to connectivity, were not able to utilize that because probably parents wanted to watch Netflix or Amazon at that point of time when kids wanted to study, or because parents wanted to carry that phone away. So it's not only a technology problem that we are facing today when we talk about equitable, accessible, and experiential. It goes much beyond technology. It goes into what is it that we are building in the fabric of our society, what policy interventions we're talking about, what systemic changes we are going to bring in. So with that, I shall start with the fellow panelists, and I would like to invite views from Mr. Ashwani Kumar first. Uh, let me start from policy perspective. So if my fellow panelists agree, we shall spend 2 to 3 minutes each more on policy perspective of the topic today. And then we shall have a detailed second round going towards technology. So to Mr. Ashwani Kumar, would like to understand in view of NEP 2020, the focus it has brought into education, the spotlight it has brought in once again to what a structured education should look like, what changes are required over there, how can we do what other countries are doing, or maybe we can do better than them, how technology can be used innovatively and effectively. But apart from technology, what do you think are system level changes that are required to be done, and how does NEP 2020 address that today? Over to you, Mr. Ashwani Kumar.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to divide that big question into two parts. First thing is from the administrative perspective. Even today, if you see, more than 42,000 schools, they don't have potable water. Around 15,000 schools, they don't have toilets. And as a district collector, I used to go for inspections of the schools, and I saw the condition is really, really very bad. In last national education policy, we were talking about access to education. Now we are talking about access to quality education. So this quality in itself, it's a big word, and quality means what we are focusing. We are not even focusing that the education is being imparted, how it is imparted, whether whatever the education is being imparted, whether the children and all the uh, community as a whole, they are understanding what is being done. So when we say that, then we have to focus on learning outcomes. Till date, I am really surprised. Most of the people, they don't know what are learning outcomes. So learning outcomes, when we are teaching the students, whether these students, they're absorbing what is being taught to them. So that's a very, very important thing we need to focus on. NCRT, they're already learning outcomes defined for all the classes. After learning outcomes, when we move forward, this entire ecosystem, because of the online new facilities, so when we are imparting instruction in online mode, we need to develop a specialized pedagogy. Till now, our education, all the teachers, all the training, entire ecosystem, it has been designed for the traditional methods of teaching. But in the new national education policy, where focus is more on vocational education, we are focusing more on online modes of teaching. And Ministry of Education, they have developed two important programs, Swamprabha and Diksha. If you see the quality is little, we need to work more on quality. And as Microsoft is conducting this, sponsoring this or uh, this conference, so I used to go to on the internet, and I used to find out many courses. So there are courses on LinkedIn. If you see the qualitative courses which are being offered on LinkedIn and the courses which are being offered on Swamprabha and other portals, there's a huge difference. So for that, we need to develop the qualitative aspects and the new methodology, special pedagogy that need to be worked on. So that I would say that administratively we need to work on these two things: spatial pedagogy, which we need to develop. We need to develop online content. We need to develop the methods of online assessment, and we need to impart the way these methods, how this evaluation needs to be done. We need to teach it to our all the community of the teachers.
Thank you so much. The key takeaway words for me from what you said are learning outcomes. Definitely very important. I'm sure most of us understand what learning outcomes are. And today, there's a great emphasis being paid on that. So lots of assessments being done, lots of experiments being done around changing learning outcomes. How do we bring learning outcomes to the shape where they are supposed to be? Also in terms of specialized pedagogy. And with these two phrases, let me move on to Mr. Dhanaraju from the state of Madhya Pradesh. MP has been doing quite some interventions in the education at basic education level and secondary education level. Also, I think MP has a plan called CM Rise, Schools of Excellence, wherein they intend to bring in some kind of differentiation to education. So talking about specialized pedagogy, talking about learning outcomes, talking about access to quality education. Now, if I were to take that to state level, Mr. Dhanraju, in your experience, the events that happened during pandemic, the challenges that pandemic posed to us, how have they started impacting the thinking at the state level? How have they started impacting readiness at the state level? What interventions are being done over there from policy perspective, and policy which ultimately links back to technology?
Thank you and good morning everyone for having me here. I'll just spend some few seconds on setting the context where I am coming from. In Madhya Pradesh, we handle around 100,000 schools. 100,000 schools and close to 10 million children. My friend was talking about the excess, right? In government sector, most of the states, especially in the heartland state, and I'm sure even southern states where I come from are not an exception. We are still struggling with the basic, issues like excess we have achieved. Now we are looking at the quality. So I'll break the question into two parts. What the pandemic has done to the education sector, we all know the kind of damage that the pandemic has done to education sector, especially school education and government, children who are studying in government schools. Our children have almost been pulled at least by 2 years of learning loss. And surveys after surveys, even our own internal survey, national achievement survey, every survey after survey is, almost proving the fact that the learning loss is very huge. But if I look at the brighter side of the, COVID lockdown, it made us to think beyond barriers. I'll explain what does that mean. See, in government sector, we have always been hooked by these three components. One is the school as a brick and mortar, physical entity. Then the teacher, and third one is textbook. No, we were never able to realize that the learning can happen beyond these three barriers. When everything came to standstill, children were not coming to school, lockdown, teacher was not able to meet the children physically, and textbooks, of course, Madhya Pradesh and teachers of Madhya Pradesh did a wonderful job by reaching to the children, to their homes, distributing them textbooks, workbooks, and other study material. But of course, the learning has to happen beyond the textbooks. So, in a way, COVID-induced lockdown taught us to break these barriers and look at the, blended modes of learning, experiential learning, and other forms of learning. One. If I, list out other, learnings that we had, one was the power of technology. As basic as, WhatsApp was helping us to reach to millions of children. And finally, the engagement that would help our children to pick up learning through community volunteers, through peer learning. So the experiential learning was forced on us in a way due to COVID pandemic, and now we are trying to leverage the experiences that we picked, during the COVID. My friend mentioned learning outcome. It's a very kind of a thing that we discuss in a among the community which knows the education sector very closely. After National Achievement Survey that was done in 2021, the results are out. Everybody is talking about learning outcome. Why the child should attend a particular grade, and what he or she should pick up after completing that grade. So when we come to quality, we are talking about that. So just to conclude my opening remark, there is a huge change in the way that we are thinking, that learning can and should happen beyond these physical barriers. And as a government, we have to create that enabling atmosphere through technology, through engagement, and other modes of communication to continue learning. So I'll come whenever there is an opportunity. Thank you so much, Vikas.
Thank you so much. And I think I couldn't agree more. Pandemic has shattered the myth wherein we used to think of school as a brick and mortar model, a place where one has to go physically. So pandemic has totally shattered that myth. And on the same vein, let me invite comments from Shailendra ji on Delhi model virtual schools. What led to thinking about these virtual schools? What was the objective behind that? How did you start that journey? And where are we today on that?
So thanks, Gaurav. I think whosoever designed this conference and the topic of this particular session deserves praise, because in the same sentence you have put access, equity, and experience. But I think these three terms need to be deciphered further. In this century, probably we attained for the first time providing physical access to children in school. That was not a small achievement, but that happened somehow. It is under stress for different reasons. I'll elaborate more on that when I get to that. As far as equity is concerned, we are falling severely short. I mean, while access increased, on the equity parameter, I think we have created multiple kinds of world. We have 5-star, 7-star schools for certain set of segment children. And we have a very poor quality school, we have very poor quality of facilities in those schools and very limited opportunity to learn in those schools for many children. So that is where we come as far as equity is concerned. And if we were to talk about experience, now the experience of different set of children coming from different background would be very different. For someone who has stepped into the school for the first time in their generation or in their family, the experience is very different from what it would be for somebody who has like a second, third, or a fourth generation school goer. So all these things basically complicate the situation further. But as a policy maker, our responsibility is to address the situation based upon the realities that we are confronted with. And therefore, when your specific question about Delhi government's model virtual school should be seen not in isolation, that here is one-off attempt. It has to be seen in the overall perspective of how Delhi government looked at the education per se. In the last 7 years, it has been trying to bridge that access and equity issue to a great extent by creating a very good quality school education in terms of, say, basic infrastructure that is required for any kind of learning. We kind of, say, moved in that direction so that we have to have an equitable opportunity for children who are going to a private school as well as to those who are coming into the, in government schools. Similarly, in terms of experience, what we have tried to do is to use innovative pedagogies, use more creative way of engagement to make sure that the imagination that the children have about education is like they can really think about. Now, this pandemic also taught us about a new fault line in terms of access. Earlier also, if you look at the UDI's data, nearly 15% children leave school at the secondary stage. In Delhi, this was close to 9%. Now, if we have to provide access to every child who should be in school in some form or the others, probably we will have to look beyond the brick and mortar schools as well. So therefore, we decided to set up Delhi Model Virtual School, which was just launched a couple of weeks back, and we are conducting the admission process. The idea here is that no matter where the child is, something good is happening in Delhi schools. Can we share this with any child, any part of the country, wherever he or she is, to be able to access that using technology on that? And give that experience to the child, which is basically required if we were to imagine, say, getting children future ready. So that is the idea behind setting up a model virtual school. As I said, we have just started. This is a pilot that we are doing. We have got so far about nearly 1,200 applications. We are processing that. We'll be offering admission in 9th grade. And over the years, this is for the secondary school, so that, because as per right to education, children have to study in a physical school up to grade 8. Beyond that, any child who, for whatever reason, cannot continue in the physical form, either in Delhi or anywhere in India, or maybe over a period of time, we can look at the world at large, can join these virtual schools, and we will try to provide the same quality of education that we provide in our regular school.
Thank you so much, Shailendra. When you talk about equity, and as you mentioned that access probably is still addressed to some extent, equity is yet to be fully grappled with. I sometimes wonder, as we move towards digital, would e-learning actually bring in more equity, or it's going to be much more difficult to achieve equity in an e-learning scenario? Because when we talk about e-content, when we talk about various aids, various devices, various kind of solutions available, would it actually face that equitability problem? Would it face the problem of equity across various social stratums, across various classes, the privileged and not so privileged? Does everyone today have equal access to e-mode or not? So I'm not too sure whether technology actually bring in more equity or not, but I think we all can wait and see, and we all can strive towards that. And in that context, would like to invite comments from Mr. Sanjeev Banzal. When we talk about e-learning content, How do you believe?
Was that a question that you were asking or a comment?
No, that was just a comment. I was wondering.
Okay, so I will take it as a question, or maybe later or whenever
Sure,
you want, I'll
come
come back
to
and
it.
respond to that.
I was just about to ask that question to Mr. Sanjeev Banzal.
Okay.
That in his view, how can e-learning bring more equity? How do you make it more equitable, more accessible to everyone? Because as I mentioned, I'm not too sure whether e-content will bring in more equity or it will create more equity challenges for us.
Thank you very much. And thank you all the organizers for inviting us for this panel discussion and on a very, very important subject. Because if we want to go to become developed nation in 25 years of time, as Honorable Prime Minister has said from the Red Fort, uh, education, health and skill development are three very, very important areas where we need to really work. And I feel that education, because it's one of the major source for bringing socio-economic changes in the country. So main focus should be given for the education. And because the whole purpose of giving education is to not only to impart content to the student or the learner, but also in the form he understands, in the manner it can be imparted to him, and the language where he can understand. So in all manner, this e-learning can bridge this kind of gap which we presently find. And going for the equitable access to education, it is very important that education through e-learning should be given, and for that we need to work on the content, we need to work on the concept, we need to work on the connectivity, we need to work on the communication, and we need to work on the continuous assessment also, so that the desired outcome are come. And secondly, to have it accessible, it is very important that we do not leave behind our important segment of the society, that is children with disability or the young children, so that they should also be covered and given education in the form they need it, at the place they need it, and the way they want to access it. To fulfill this gap of equity and accessibility, it is important that the going forward, when we are going for a hybrid mode of education, as Honorable Minister said in the inaugural session, it is important that these devices which are given are affordable devices, because this inequality actually comes from the socio-economic background, and so it is very important that devices are given at an affordable rate, and the data charges etc. are also brought down to the level, and the digital interface which can be through which a device can be connected, this is also very, very important area where we need to work. As far as connectivity is concerned, because that is very paramount important when we are connecting our devices, or we want to proliferate our content etc. to the masses using the technology or assistive technologies etc. Connectivity will play a very, very important role, and in that context, Honorable Prime Minister has given that within 3 years' time, each and every village of the country should have the optical fiber access. So once that will come, I am sure that using the fiber and using the last mile connectivity using Wi-Fi, we will be able to fill this gap to a large extent. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev ji. As you highlighted, to bring in equity, we will need affordable devices. Otherwise, I'm not too sure would equity come in or not. Also, we would need content, because probably the highly curated content comes at a high price. So would everyone have access to highly curated content, or would people be struggling to get right kind of content? Also, what about children with special need and children coming from marginalized sections of society? Would they have that equitable access to devices and to content? And do we need specific devices or content for them? And my sense is, to grapple over all these matters, which actually are matters of very high concern, we need to have huge capacities built into our system. And this is where I would invite comments from Mr. Rishikesh, that what kind of capacity building exercise you believe we need to undertake, and what's happening in that scenario today?
Thank you. Capacity building is an important area. In fact, the government at the highest level is doing it. At the civil servants level, There's a Mission Karmyogi program where Capacity Building Commission is working for the whole program and building the capacities. If we compare it with education, in the education sector, capacity has to be built for students, for teachers, for institutions. And once the capacity is built, then we would be able to leverage whatever is available, be it technology, be it pedagogy or anything. Important over here is digital adoption has already happened. Either it was compulsory during pandemic or later, but we need to use it continuously in our teaching, in regular teaching. All our teachers who are here should use the technology in regular teaching. I think that is the most important factor where capacity builds actually. In our country as such, there are 800 odd universities, 41,000 colleges, nearly 10 million teachers, including higher education and school education, nearly 290 million students of higher education and school education, 1.5 million schools. So this is a huge numbers. And when we are talking about these huge numbers and implementing it on the ground with 750 plus districts, 6,500 plus blocks, 2.5 lakh gram panchayats and 6.5 lakh villages, we are talking about equitability, accessibility and experiential learning. We need to provide access. Dr. Banzal was talking about inclusion. That is the most important factor. We need to provide access to the rural area, largely because 70% of our people live in rural area. Students, in fact, if you see the data being used, almost 45% of the data usage is happening in the rural areas. As a part of common service centers, we have 5.5 lakh common service centers, which are largely doing digital literacy and financial literacy training. And we are not into education as such, but we support the students both at the school level and at the higher education level with our infrastructure which is ready at the ground level, which can be leveraged. So coming back to the capacity building part, I think capacity building has been recognized as an important tool. Important factor is the training of the trainers. I think that also is very important from the top down side when we envisage that quality control and quality assurance should be there in order to deliver the goods. But at the ground level, if it doesn't happen, we need to take corrective action. So I think this link is missing. Also, India's ranking on the human capital index is not very good, including gross enrollment ratios both in higher education and school education. So I think all these, seeing all these challenges and the opportunities which we have, capacity building becomes very important, not only in education area, but in all spheres of life. And for any project implementation on the ground, you need to build capacity of the people, of the stakeholders in order to get the best results. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rishikesh. I think you touched a very raw nerve when you talked about GER and retention, because that's a challenge we all grapple with, and that's something which we all aim to go better into. But apart from that, I think the massive experience that CSC has gained over the years of working in rural areas using technology, and especially in terms of digital literacy, even if it's not at school education level, but the digital literacy and financial literacy efforts being spearheaded by CSC, the learnings from there, I believe, if those could be compiled, could be of tremendous use to educationists who are trying to use digital as a mechanism for taking education at mass level in rural areas. I think it will be highly useful. And with that, I'll move on to Aparna and invite some industry views from her. We have heard the government views. Aparna, what do you think is the industry's view on making education equitable, accessible, and experiential? What efforts do you see coming in from industry at large?
Sure. So good morning, everyone, and a very insightful commentary from the eminent panelists. I'm actually kind of real-time rounding up, what that means for us as a responsible, industry person. So first and foremost, I think the common thing that binds all of us was the pandemic, right? And during pandemic, as we saw, every industry went through three phases, which was respond. Just immediately this happened, and depending on who you were, how do you get back to work, how do you get back to school. The second stage was recover, So you kind of try to get your business back to track and so on, and then finally reimagine. And whether you were, a unicorn like a Flipkart or Myntra who maybe came up overnight and actually started to sell sanitizers and, masks in a day, to, maybe a public sector, to education, I think there was a different trajectory that the industry has seen. But there are actually a lot of commonalities that we can learn from each other and apply even to education. So as I was listening to all of you, some of the things that come to my mind, which are very common no matter which industry we are in. I think the first one is just relevance, or giving that personalized experience to our students in this case, right? That how do I learn? When do I learn best? If I'm a student with like specific needs or special needs, how do I get enabled on immersive learning or a text-to-speech way of learning so that I can listen more, maybe subtitling so that I can read also while I listen, and so on. So I think that notion of personalization is literally something that cuts across into education also. I think so that's the first one. Second is affordable. You might think that industries or there could be rich organizations, seemingly rich organizations who are not, who may not care as much, but that's not true. Everybody is driven by their P&L and the constraints. So how do you make it affordable? And I think there, some of the comments on how do you make that last mile happen. So as an example, we did some work with the government of Gujarat to enable 1 million students who did not have access to cheap devices or the right internet connection. So there is that aspect of, how do you cover the last mile? Second flavor being, how do you just make them learn or enable some of that content that they may, need. The last one is the flexibility again. So again, flexibility, whether it is a bank user or a manufacturing business, everybody at the end of it needs to provide flexibility to their end user. And again, in context of education, how do we build, that kind of a model? And I just want to quote, an interesting model that even we are now trying to learn on, which is the new hybrid, right? Now that we are getting out of the pandemic, the new hybrid will require us to think about it as a 2x2 matrix. The first part of that matrix is, am I in person or am I virtual? So I think you spoke about the virtual school versus the need of students still to come to school, right? So think about it as like, I'm coming to school versus, I'm learning virtually. The other axis of that is whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, right? So I might be in the class and learning real time, or I might have access to the best of lectures, and I can watch it, listen to it in my own time with all the subtitling and everything that comes with it, right? And I think that is really the power of what we can do from this moment, which is that if we get all these elements right that we just heard, it's an opportunity to truly democratize, that information to students. So that's really, like where we are. The last point I just want to make on the outcome part of it, and I think that is where industry and education can really come together, because I think you alluded to that in terms of, how do we enable our students to get ready for the industry, right? And one specific example I want to call out is the cyber Shiksha work that we are doing on, just enabling people on various aspects of cyber security. It is for teachers, but it's also for students. And it's very heartening to see that we are getting a lot of like female students ready on that. And they have been placed in not just industry, so the Microsofts and the TCSs of the world, but also our forensic department, our police academies in different states. So the more we can connect that in terms of what outcome are we enabling these students for, I hope we can bridge the gap that the pandemic has created. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Aparna. Very relevant keywords in terms of affordability, flexibility. Of course, personalized adaptive learning is something which many states are looking at today, and it's being attempted in various formats using technology. And I think unless technology plays a good, effective role in that, it's not possible to get into that level. Also, the point which you highlighted, synchronous versus asynchronous learning, I think people are still trying to strike a balance between that. How much of learning can be synchronized, how much can be asynchronized, and what's going to impact of that. And when we talk about a hybrid learning environment, then all these components are going to matter over there. So thanks for highlighting these. And with that, I'm again tempted to go back to the state of MP, to Mr. Dhanaraju, to understand what are you planning in terms of hybrid learning. So given the challenges posed to us, given what we have heard from all the panelists. Where do you think hybrid learning is going to go? What measures do you think we are going to adopt for that?
I just use, 3 R's that, Aparna mentioned. One was response, then recover, and finally reimagine. What was the immediate response that, we could have to the pandemic-induced lockdown? So we started with a hybrid kind of, teaching learning activity. We sent out weekly learning plans, and based on those learning plans, classes were conducted on Doordarshan, then classes were conducted on radio, and some, video and other content was sent out on WhatsApp groups. So that's how we responded in the beginning. So and it had its, impact. At least we realized that this was also one of the ways to maintain the connect. Otherwise, there was no connect between the students and the teachers. In phase 2, when classes were opened with 50% capacity, then the issue came, how do you cater to the other half of the student? And how do you continue the learning continuum? So again, the same model continued through WhatsApp groups. I mean, I just want to mention some figures. Madhya Pradesh is a state where students, only 15 to 17% of the students have access to device and the connectivity. There is a huge challenge. So nonetheless, there was some support from the volunteers, though small in numbers. They lent their devices to students to at least have access to the content that was sent out. So now schools are opened, we are back to normal, but again, we have to continue with whatever we have learned over a period and should take it forward. One way is the government of India is heavily investing on the technology and devices. If I can mention my own example, out of 3 lakh teachers, this year through Samagra Shiksha, at least 2 lakh teachers are getting the tablet devices. So that much of budget has been provided by Government of India. And we are investing on technology on various counts also. Like, you might have heard about Gujarat experience of setting up Vidya Samiksha Kendra, where every student is being tracked for their, attendance and the learning outcome. So Government of India has provided budget to other states, including Madhya Pradesh, to set up such, technology-driven centers to enable data-driven decisions to monitor and enable the learning outcome. So you have to create an ecosystem to include all these aspects. Now you have device, you have technology to monitor, the content should be of high quality and content should be in synchronous with what you teach in classroom and the overall learning outcome. So that is where the Madhya Pradesh is trying to, put its resources together. Devices are being given, then quality content is being curated and being given. And finally, we are heavily investing on the training of teachers. Until unless our teachers are properly trained, their capacity is not built, we cannot think of having a quality education. So for the teachers, we are moving towards a blended training model where there would be a component of face-to-face training and supported by a digital content. So, while addressing the issue of device connectivity and at the same time, whatever can be leveraged through the capacities of teachers is being tried out. So one last thing I would like to mention, though, my friend would not agree to that, but we have spread ourselves too thinly over a period of time, and we have ended up setting up schools which have less than 100 children per schools. So Madhya Pradesh has started to consolidate kind of resource schools and create resource-rich schools, which Vikas mentioned as CM Rise schools. When over a period of 7 to 8 years, 80% of our students would be studying in these resource-rich schools, which would be encompassing all the components of new education policy, and they would be at par with any of the schools available elsewhere in the country. So, though a small beginning, but I am sure the government of Madhya Pradesh is moving in the right direction with the all help from the government of India. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You talked about devices, that how many devices we would actually need. You talked about the high quality content. You talked about teachers to be trained to be able to function such an environment. Uh, and all these elements together again give rise to two questions in my mind. One question, something which I talked earlier, and Shailendra, you were very keen to address that, uh, technology versus equity. So when you talk about e-learning, so many devices to be distributed, affordability of devices, affordability of content, people to be trained. So where would equity end up in that scenario, one? Second question comes to my mind is, as per NEP, and that's a question to Mr. Ashwani Kumar, as per NEP, how NEP actually is leveraging technology as a backbone, digital as a backbone to take education further. So inviting you, Ashwani ji, first for your comments, and would like to move on to Shailendra ji after that.
I would say that as a student, I want to access my classes, I want to access my educational material, and suppose I'm residing in a remote area. How do I do that? So till now, we have the imparting of education through classrooms and where the infrastructure is, falling short of the standards. New education policy focuses more on programs like Diksha. It focuses more on program like not even for secondary and elementary education, but for higher education as well. We have EPG Pathshala. Then we have other, we are boosting the vocational education through online modes and method. And the ERNET, they have done a wonderful work as far as connectivity is concerned. Now, earlier we used to have, shadow areas where the signals, they did not used to reach the particular area. But now all the places in the country, most of the places, we have the signals so that we can have, we can install our online devices and all that. National education policy talks about quality education. It talks about hybrid learning, and we need to focus more on flipped classrooms. What happens in a flipped classroom? Suppose a teacher is going to take a class. So whatever the teacher is going to teach, it will already before going to the class, it will be transmitted in the form of online electronic these lectures. So all the students, they will watch these all the lectures, and when they come to the class, they will talk about the experiences. So that would be, making education more qualitative, and it will be more based, more helping the learning outcomes to be achieved. And when we see that access in itself a problem. So national education policy makes it more accessible. Now, if I want to have access to more education, I can have that access. I can go to, I may be from any part of the country. I will have access to the education. I will have access to most of the learning methods. So I cannot say that because I did not have access, so I could not achieve this. So as far as access is, concerned, this access will be there, and it will be more based on qualitative aspect. So that one thing where a national education policy talks about.
Thank you so much. Shailendra ji, your views.
See, Gaurav, what I feel is that if in our discourse, whenever we use the term technology, we mean digital technology only. Or whenever we use the term, say, learning aid, we mean only digital device, then we are limiting the scope of transformative impact that education is required to make. Then we are reducing the whole agenda. Now, we have, with or without COVID, we have to acknowledge the fault line that already exists in our school education system. Frankly speaking, we are a 50% nation. Whatever we have created, whatever policies we have created, whatever things we have created, we have been able to reach out to only 50% children. And I'm not saying that in terms of, say, physical counting. If you look at the NAS data, prior to that, ASAR also, you will find that 50% children are, nearly 50% children are grade appropriate level. The problem is not with children. The problem is with our own approach. Because we have not been able to figure out probably how do we engage the remaining 50%. Now we can be very content with that because usse bhi kaam chal hi raha hai. ठीक है, we are becoming a 5 trillion economy, we are fifth largest economy with only 5-10% people reaching to the higher education and technical education, and still we are achieving that. So if that is an indicator of success, then that is fine. But if we really want to have a truly inclusive society, then we have to think about how do we engage the remaining 50%. Now, technology can be an aid in that. Of course, somebody centuries back who would have imagined, say, blackboard or a textbook or a chalk. Now, that was a technology of that time. Now, there is a technology of our time which can catapult us to a much higher learning achievement if we were to properly use that. But if we are stuck with devices only, then what we'll end up doing is basically catering to the ones who already have access to certain things. I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, we have heard stories of how the digital usage went up. And we have data when we collected at the beginning of the pandemic, we would say that only about 30-40% children would have access to, say, smartphone. And as the time progressed, this increased further. Internet usage went up. But simultaneously, one more thing happened. Many, as the schools were prolonged, like closing, most of the families reached out to somebody in the neighborhood to be a tutor of the child. And so because that human connect was required. So the value of education is very much established even in the poorest of the community. But we do not have probably the imagination that how we use that to kind of say create a more inclusive education which basically takes every child towards excellence. At Delhi government, we have tried to look at that part in a slightly different way, and therefore we have set up 4 set of specialized education school. And in that specialization, what we have done is, apart from, say, 1 set of schools which cater to STEM education, another set of schools catering to humanities, the third one is 21st century high-end skills, and the fourth one, which would sound interesting, is in the performing and visual art. Because if you imagine the kind of options we need to present to our children and the kind of areas in which they need to excel, we have to create those diverse models because we cannot have a school education system where one size fits all. So depending upon the aptitude of the child, depending upon the interest of the child, the school education system has to reimagine itself to provide those diverse opportunities to children. And in that endeavor, technology can play an enabling role. We cannot start with, hey, we have got this technology, so now work backward on that. That should not be the approach. It's like, what is our vision and idea of education? What kind of education we want for our children for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? And to achieve that, what role available technologies and emerging technologies can play? So I think the discourse has to move in that direction. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'll just move on to a very interesting concept which we have, I think, zeroed in on. Access to technology versus not having access to technology, and how do you define technology? But apart from that, how do we take care of people who are connected versus people who are partially connected, people who are disconnected, in terms of access technologically or access electronically? So inviting views from Sanjeev ji and Rishikesh ji, this is your experience. Till that digital divide is bridged up, till we are able to connect people, what could be done? How do we bring in equity from that perspective?
Thank you very much. Actually, this is a very, very important question that those who are connected, those who are partially connected, and those who are not connected, how to give them quality education. As Madhya Pradesh has done to distribute the tablets for the student, this approach has to be taken by everybody, because if we want to move to next level, all our students have to have good connected devices. And within that, nowadays technologies are available where you can give the content online basis, and you can regularly upgrade them. There are technologies where you can give preloaded content using the devices, maybe tablet or laptop, etc., where time to time, whenever the connectivity is there, the contents are getting upgraded as per the need. And in those areas where connectivity is not there at all, there also preloaded contents can be given so as to student to understand. But going forward, recently government has come out with a new space policy where we can provide connectivity using the satellite. And two kinds of satellite have also been permitted other than geostationary satellite. One is low Earth orbit satellites, another is medium Earth orbit satellites. So there will be hundreds of satellites will be revolving around Earth, and they will be helping us to connect in those areas where these are not so far connected. So once that will unfold within a due course of time, then naturally that will benefit for those areas where they are yet to be connected. So what I want to say in nutshell that to cater to all these three areas, it is important that we should provide government, corporates, and maybe diaspora. They all come together and provide the digital devices to the student, and make connectivity also a part of that program, so that everybody is updated and contents are given in the form which is desired to have, so as to have a personalized and adaptive learning. Thank you.
Seeing the connectivity challenges, what we find is there is a Census of India survey data of 2011. The current survey will happen in 23, but if we talk about the 2011 census, it talks about access to devices in rural areas. So if you see that report, it says around 94% of the population living in the rural areas do not have access to computers, laptops, phones. That was in 2011, but after Geo and telecom revolution, I think that data will surely change when the reports come out of 23 survey. Also, in 2014-15, there was survey done by National Sample Survey Organization on socio-economic indicators, which also spoke about similar matching data that 6% of the people only have access in the rural areas. So there's a larger challenge of access to devices. That is one. The other important thing is the technology, how it has changed. I think no one has taught Indians WhatsApp, but everyone uses it. And we can actually put some of the content on WhatsApp, and students in rural areas, including when we are talking about adult education, when we are talking about elderly education, we can actually do that in financial literacy. I think that becomes very important. Another area is OTT platform. Since OTT is so popular, why not put some of the education content on OTT in a local loop? For example, every Gram Panchayat with BharatNet connectivity there and local Wi-Fi available, we can put some content at the Gram Panchayat level, and this content can be used or accessed by people in vernacular across the board. I think these are some of the solutions which I have in mind, which can actually change the scenario. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As we come towards the end of the session, I would like to do some crystal ball gazing along with Aparna. Aparna, what lies ahead? What are the emerging trends in technology? What is going to happen in future? The future which is here already, the future which is yet to happen, which shall aid in equitable, accessible, and experiential education.
So I think we already talked a lot about the devices, access to devices, and so on, and how do we get there. We talked about content. How do we make the content more democratic? How do we create that content? Whether it's MS Learn, LinkedIn, the content that is created at grassroots levels. In terms of future, maybe I'll take one pivot, kind of building on Shailendra's point of view, that if making education inclusive is one of the things we really want to commit to, then what gets measured gets addressed is maybe what I would want to lead with. And so if I take that as one of the technology levers, what that will mean is how do we create one digital state or a digital country, like gather all the information around education all at one place, because a lot of the information right now is kind of siloed, and some of it may not even be digital at the moment. The reason I'm saying that is that if I am operating at a center level like an air traffic controller almost, and saying what are the 3 questions I want answers to, what is working well, what is not working well. So while we may get a lot of positive data points on how well we are doing, and I think you spoke about us as an economy and so on, we can sometimes miss what we are not doing well on, right? And the only way to get that information is the mirror, which is a dashboard and an analytics engine for ourselves on how are we doing on the parameters that we care about, right? And that is where really the experts can come in to say what are the top 5 questions, 10 questions that we need to answer at a country level, at a state level, at a district level, school level, down to the student level, right? Even the student probably wants to learn, which are the popular courses, where was their conversion into a job readiness. Depending on the vantage point, my questions can be different. But having that one single data estate from which we can derive those insights, now whether it is just basic analytics to maybe it's some predictive, and we can go towards AI and machine learning also based on that data set. So I think that is one place where we can really understand where we are and be able to define where we want to get. And then be able to break it down into what the trajectory of that looks like. And we have seen some of this work in, for example, Nebraska State in the US, who really turned their quality of education and why students want to work with them or why not, what is their ranking. There can be different aspects that can come together on that, but that is really an opportunity, that data-driven insights and decision-making as an ability that anybody, even in this group, can get access to. The second, which, since you asked about the futuristic, and I know there is so much conversation of metaverse and avatars, that remains to be seen on how, when I talk about either, the hybrid version, so where I'm in person, but 2 of my student friends are in their virtual avatars. That is probably, like a future state. Now, how real is it? Will it actually replace that experience that I get from, chatting to you as a physical person? I think we are in very, very early days, but that's probably the exciting space to really watch out for.
Thanks. I think it's really exciting if you were to start going into metaverse and what all possibilities it can open up. But to your other point in terms of having a single place wherein all the data comes and converges, where we can make sense out of data, we can do slicing, dicing, we can do check comparative things, predictive analysis. So I think gradually we are moving towards that. So with India in place, National Digital Education Architecture, I can see what Government of India is attempting to do, and I think that's one place wherein being personally involved, both as individual and as a firm as EY. I think that's one thing, one place where government has opened it up for the industry. Government has been inviting all industry participants to come and do their sandbox models, come and participate, come and talk about what all they believe is possible in India. So with that, I think we come to the end of the session. I must thank each of the fellow panelists. Very interesting views. I stand wizened up today. Lot of learning for me. I'm sure a lot of you would go back with good learnings from here. Thank you so much for being a very kind audience. No interruption at all. I won't say not much interruption, no interruption at all. So if organizers permit, I may invite 3 questions. We'll take a couple of minutes. If there are any questions, would request you to introduce yourself, ask the question, and please tell us to whom the question is directed towards.
Good morning. I am Dr. Anand from APJ Satya University. Basically, I am a teacher educator. So my question is, sir, very specific actually, related to experiential learning and the new education policy. It explicitly states that there should be 50 hours that every teacher should be trained in a particular year. So that means 50 hours means at least, if taken continuously, it's about 6 days in a week. So that much, and number of teachers that we have in public sector. So it's a very, very challenging task. And I don't think it will be possible only through face-to-face mode, because the teachers are also to be relieved for that if we do face-to-face mode. So something like this hybrid learning that we are talking about, or say through online mode, that is very much required. So now the industry leaders are here, and then I think from Microsoft and other. So probably you may have to have a greater role in it for this teacher training purpose. Otherwise, the experiential learning, we talked about learning outcomes also.
Sir, what's the question?
So
What would
the
you like
question
to
is
ask?
that how, in what respect, such a huge challenging task, this technology can help us, whether it is Microsoft, whether it is ERNET, or because you have been
Whom
there.
would you like to
and
answer
so,
that?
So that's my question.
No, probably I'll answer the first part.
Yeah.
The technology would come later. He mentioned a very pertinent point that NEP says at least 50 hours of teacher professional development part should be there every year for every teacher. So I'm happy to share that based on National Professional Standards for Teacher, Madhya Pradesh has recently released teacher education policy, which specifically talks about the trajectory of the teacher, where he starts, where he wants to reach, in which the 50 hours is the minimum. So NPST specifically talks about core values, which are, constitutional values and other values, then the subject domain knowledge, then the practice. I know my subject, whether I am practicing in the classroom or not. Finally is professional development. So based on that, we have designed the policy. The specific answers to your question is, face-to-face, 50 hours is 6 days in a year will not be a good model, because now we know the technology, we know the blended thing. It should be a mix of both blended and face-to-face. And at the same time, it should be a kind of menu available to the teacher. See, this is where you stand. These are the suggestions based on the assessment, and it's a continuous loop. So what we have designed on technology part is, as a teacher, I can see my dashboard where I stand on all these components. And I would be given a suggestion to take up the courses available on Diksha, on other platform, free to available platform. Again, it's a continuous in-course, end of the course. Even my students' performance would reflect on my performance. So that's how we have designed it. So technology part, if anybody wants to answer.
Yeah, no, I think a simple answer is I think technology is an enabler, end of the day, right? So I think everything he spoke about, I think we are now in a world where nobody can say that, I know it all. I think we all will need to learn, and will need to learn all the time. And so just having a framework which gives me the guidance on how I can pace my learning. Maybe there are some mandatory options, but there are some suggested options where I can measure my progress, or where is the deficit. I think a lot of that framework can be provided by technology, but what should be that guidance, whether it's 50 hours is the right answer or 100 hours, I think that's where we would definitely lean on the experts to define that for any state or for the country as well.
Thank you. I'm sorry, in the interest of the time, unable to invite any further questions. In case you have questions, please catch up with the panelists during the breaks. So thank you so much once again. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Can we have a huge round of applause for all our esteemed speakers, our moderator as well?